was a German philosopher who was a pupil of Leonard Nelson, who was in turn a pupil of Kant's. And so he's a philosopher in the Kantian tradition, maybe not a very well-known one, but someone who actually was very much troubled by the problem of the foundations of knowledge. And Popper says, the problem of the basis of experience has troubled few thinkers so deeply as Fries. He taught that if the statements of science are not to be accepted dogmatically, we must be able to justify them. If we demand justification by reasoned argument, in the logical sense, then we are committed to the view that statements can be justified only by statements. The demand that all statements are to be logically justified is therefore bound to lead to an infinite regress. Now, if we wish to avoid the danger of dogmatism, as well as an infinite regress, then it seems as if we could only have recourse to psychologism. That is, the doctrine that statements can be justified not only by statements, but also by perceptual experience. Psychologism is not a very good term, I think, but it merely means statements can be, or theories can be justified by looking at experience. Faced with this trilemma, here is Fries' trilemma: dogmatism, infinite regress, and psychologism. So three different options, but these are three different options, three different possible answers to the same question. How do I provide knowledge with a firm ground, a firmer ground, with a solid bedrock? Faced with this trilemma, Popper says, Fries, and with him almost all epistemologists who wish to account for our empirical knowledge, opted for psychologism. But that's not Popper's own answer to this trilemma, to this problem. Actually, what Popper says, Popper refuses to answer the question. How can I provide knowledge with more solid background, or with more solid foundations? If I approach the problem from this point of view, if that is my problem, the question I want to answer, then Fries is right. You either go for dogmatism or infinite regress or psychologism. Dogmatism is the answer provided by religion, for example. We have some knowledge which is given to us by one God, and we rely on that in a dogmatic way. There is no need to go further than that. God has given us that knowledge, and that's it. This is dogmatism, which is not very satisfying or satisfactory from the epistemological point of view. The other option, if we want to answer that question, to repeat, is infinite regress. We know A. How do we know A? Because of B. And then we question B. How do we know B? Because of C, and so on and so forth. Either we stop at some point by appealing to dogmatism, or else we have an infinite regress. And this, in turn, is not a good or a satisfactory approach from the epistemological point of view. Hence, as Popper said, most philosophers opted for the third option, psychologism. We stop in the regress from A to B to C to D and so on by looking at experience. Popper's solution is to cut the Gordian knot, so to say, of the problem of the foundation by saying knowledge cannot and need not be verified, be supported positively from any experience. And still it is solid enough, reliable enough to allow us to do what, I mean, to fly planes, to build all sorts of machineries, to test very highly theoretical physical theories, and so on and so forth, explore the universe, go on to other planets, and so on and so forth. We need not to have a episteme to do that. And here's Popper's way to approach Frie's trilemma. Again, he does not take one of the three options because he does not want to answer that question. He cuts the problem at the very root. He cuts the question at the very root. He says, what is our position now in regard to Frie's trilemma? The choice between dogmatism, infinite regress, and psychologism. The basic statements at which we stop, which we decide to accept as satisfactory and as sufficiently tested, have admittedly the character of dogmas. So we stop at some explanations at a given moment. And this is, Popper, so to say, is a form of dogma. But only insofar as we may desist from justifying them by further arguments or by further tests. So it is a form of dogmatism, but this kind of dogmatism is innocuous, since should the need arise, these statements can easily be tested further. I admit that this too makes the chain of deduction in principle infinite. So it takes a small dose, so to say, of dogmatism, but it is innocuous because we may resume the chain of tests at any given point. But then we fall into a kind of infinite regress, because these resuming tests can go on forever. But this kind of infinite regress is also innocuous, since in our theory, there is no question of trying to prove any statements by means of it. We have this a kind of infinite regress, but since we do not aim at proving anything, this is an innocuous form of infinite regress. And finally, as to psychologism, I admit again that the decision to accept a basic statement and to be satisfied with it is causally connected with our experiences. So it's a form of psychologism. Psychologism is a bad word, is a bad term for what Popper is talking about. To me, it's a very bad choice of terminology. I don't know why he went for that. Possibly Fries himself used this term, but anyway, disregarded. Think of it's called psychologism because it refers to perceptual experience, the experience of the senses. We test our theory, our hypothesis with the help of the senses. It's what Galileo called sensata esperienza, the experience of our sense organs, which may be, how can I say, improved by using tools such as Galileo's telescope or the detector for gravitational waves. So if I may go back, so we have a form of dogmatism in Popper's position. We have a form of dogmatism, but it is innocuous because we can resume testing at any point. Then we may have a form of infinite regress, but again, it's an innocuous infinite regress because we don't want to prove anything. And then he says, I admit that the decision to accept a basic statement and to be satisfied with it is causally connected with our experiences, especially with our perceptual experiences. This is the psychologism. But we do not attempt to justify basic statements. Experiences, says Popper says, can motivate a decision and hence an acceptance or rejection of a statement, but the basic statement cannot be justified by them, no more than by thumping on the table. And this is Popper's approach to Frie's trilemma and avoidance, in a sense, of Frie's trilemma, because Popper says we do away with it. If we accept the question at the root of Free's trilemma, then there are only three options, namely Free's trilemma. But if we reject that way of approaching the problem, that is providing foundations for our knowledge, then we can see that we can have little doses, little innocuous doses, so to say, of the three elements, the three options in Free's trilemma, come up with a completely different perspective. And indeed, the famous last sentence of this chapter of the logic of scientific discovery says the empirical basis of objective science has nothing absolute about it. Science does not rest upon solid bedrock. The bold structure of its theories rises, as it were, above a swamp. It is like a building erected on piles. This is a famous metaphor he uses at the very end of chapter 5. The piles are driven down from above into the swamp, but not down to any natural or given base. And if we stop driving the piles deeper, it is not because we have reached firm ground. We simply stop when we are satisfied that the piles are firm enough to carry the structure, at least for the time being.